Good afternoon, everyone. I have the country of Ireland. Ireland is better known as the Republic of Ireland. Ireland is a unitary, parliamentary republic located on the island of Ireland. Dublin is the capital of the country. Some background information of Ireland. It's got 6.4 million people, and the country has two official languages, English and Irish. English is the most spoken language, with over 90% of the population in Ireland speaking it as their first language. Ireland has approximately 133,000 native Irish-speaking people in the country. To understand the situation in Ireland with their language, we really have to understand the history of the language and what the Irish people have gone through. Irish or Irish Gaelic is the derivative of the language orientation from early inscriptions dating back to the 4th century AD. Over time, primitive Irish evolved into Old Irish, then to Middle Irish, to what it has become today. Now, Ireland has a very specific situation. Their language was almost killed off. Mainly, a couple of reasons. Number one, British rule. The British directly governed Ireland beginning in 1801. They had national schools. They were ruled by the British. You couldn't speak Irish. Irish was perceived as backwards. Irish-speaking parents actually discouraged their children from speaking Irish, wanted them to speak English because English was the language of prosperity and opportunity. So it seemed that both people were on the same page. The British government did not want anyone to speak Irish. Parents did not want their children to speak Irish. And over time, we've seen an extreme decline in the use and the acquisition of the language. You couldn't be a Catholic landowner. The British controlled who owned land in the country. Irish Catholics were also restricted from voting, from holding public office, from living in an incorporated town or near an incorporated town, entering into a profession that would actually lead to prosperity. Second reason, then came the Great Famine, the potato blight. This disease actually destroyed a lot of crops. From 1845 to 1852, it was responsible for over 1 million deaths, and another million immigrated out of the country. There was a lot of poverty in Ireland, and 1/3 of the population was dependent on potatoes. Potato production in 1844 was estimated around 15,000 tons. 2 years later, there was an estimated 3,000 tons of potato production. Population of Ireland decreased 20% over a 10-year period, 1841 to 1851. This was a contributing factor for the loss of language for the Irish people. During this language shift, neither stable bilingualism nor long-term diglossia developed. There could have been a chance where they could have preserved their mother tongue while capturing the benefits and opportunities of the English language. Children in this scenario could have experienced simultaneous bilingualism, acquiring two mother tongues at the same time. For people over the age of 5 or 6, they could have learned sequential bilingualism. For this situation of bilingualism to have fully developed, would have had to have a strong identification with their mother tongue. Now, we know from history that many of the Irish people actually had contempt for their language. In our readings, May forecasts this shift over time. He describes 3 broad stages in this process. Stage 1 sees an increased pressure on minority speakers to speak the majority language. Now, in this situation, although he uses the word minority, due to British and religious oppression, the majority was the minority when it came to power. British rule restricted the use of Irish and punished those who did not conform. Stage 2 sees a period of bilingualism in which both languages continue to be spoken concurrently. Irish ended up being the language of the elderly. Young people did not speak the language. They did not acquire the language. They learned English because it was a language of opportunity, and there were restrictions and punishments for the use of the Irish language. Now, May describes how this language loss begins with the younger generation. In the final stage, which takes a couple of generations, May sees the replacement of the minority language with the majority language. If you look at the population makeup, the majority is that in power, and the majority set the rules. The majority language was English, and that's what took effect. Now, many of these native language speakers live in specific areas of the country, and those areas are actually called Gaelic. These Gaelic regions are made up of, there are pockets of Gaelic regions appear mainly on the east coast of the country. Approximately 25% of all native tongue Irish speakers live in Donegal County. Some other counties include Mayo, Galway, Kerry, Cork, Waterford, and Meath. Now, there's some unique initiatives that are happening in these different Gaelic regions, all to further promote the Irish language. Now, to be in a Gaelic region is now, because of governmental programs and initiatives, actually a status symbol. If you are in a Gaelic region, you are looked upon as a kind of a higher status. There are a lot of cities that are trying to either return to Gaelic status or achieve Gaelic status. For example, West Clare used to have Gaelic status. They've lost their status. Now they have around 200 native speakers, and they are doing all that they can to get that status back. The capital of Ireland, again, is Dublin. Dublin is on the west coast of Ireland. They are not they do not have Gaelic status, but they are actually building communities inside the city that will be completely Irish-only speaking. This will include businesses, governmental programs, and education. The Irish language has three major dialects: Connacht, Munster, and Ulster. Connacht dialect is actually in the eastern central part of the country. Ulster dialect is in the northern part of the country, and Munster dialect is in the southern eastern part of the country. Author Peter U. Laguerre, he wrote in the Munster dialect to show young people his view of what good Irish actually was. In 2003, Ireland passed the Official Language Act. It set rules for the use of Irish language by the government. The act created an official to monitor and enforce these rules. The goal is to increase the number of mother tongue speakers of Irish from approximately 133,000 to at least 250,000 by the year 2030. The language policy overtly focuses on reestablishing the Irish language in Ireland. This language's resource orientation increased the value of the language, which enhances the chances of success. Okay, changes in the government actually include all the communication used by the government. It actually reads that oral announcements, whether live or public, whether live or recorded, made by a public body, the headings of stationery used by the public body, and the contents and the layout of any signage, advertisement placed in it shall be either in Irish or in English and Irish. All communication by writing or by email will be replied to in Irish or Irish and English. Documents made by public bodies, including but not limited to policy, annual reports, financial statements, and official correspondence, must be in Irish or Irish and English. Now, covertly, we find that government communities, they're not hiring because of the new policy. They actually don't hire individuals that are not fluent in Irish. So if you apply for a job and you are not fluent in Irish, you will not be considered. Government teachers must pass a compulsory Irish examination. So with little of the population being fluent in Irish, the educational system has been denying itself good young talented teachers due to the restrictions they self-impose. Some people in the country that speak English only are looking at it as oppressive because you're discriminating on language. Now, many believe that those who want to speak the language already do, and the oppressive nature of the governing body mandating the Irish language to all is wrong. The other side has a romanticized opinion of the Irish language, believing it should be nourished and cherished. Now, this language commissioner that goes around to make sure these rules are in place is actually having a hard time penalizing governmental agencies, because really less than 2% of government agencies can actually give a lecture in Irish. And these are people that have been employed prior to the initiative. In a recent study conducted by Raymond Hickey in 2009, which focused on the language use and attitude in Ireland, 73% of Irish people felt that the language was central to their culture and history. Now, this is a view taken by the government. So a majority of the population and the government have the same vision. Over 70% of those surveyed had a positive outlook for Irish in the future. It showed that over 62% of those surveys did not know their ancestors who were native speakers, and less than 1/3 could name an author or works created in the Irish language. Now, there are a couple types of schools in Ireland. There are L1 English schools, L2 Irish. Students are taught to read, write, and speak Irish over 1,500 hours over a 13-year period in primary and secondary schools. Unfortunately, these schools do not help students acquire Irish. They have to prove that they're fluent in Irish. But by the time they graduate, many of these students cannot read a newspaper in Irish and cannot watch a television broadcast in Irish. The policy of bilingualism is a failure in these types of schools. Now, there are schools called Gaelscoileanna. Now, these schools are Irish L1, English or another foreign language L2 bilingual schools. They produce very, very high rates of bilingual first language Irish speaking graduates. These schools are actually looked upon with high status because graduates from these programs are highly recruited to be teachers and government workers because of the Irish speaking fluency that they have. Now, the government recognizes the difference between schools. They understand English L1 and Irish L1 schools were producing two different types of students. So in 2009, they published and enacted the 20-year Irish language strategy. It requires primary teachers to improve their competence in the Irish language and provide partial immersion in the early years of a student's primary education. The Gaelscoil schools offer many L2 languages, including English, as well as Irish, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Latin, Japanese, Arabic, Russian, Lithuanian, and Dutch. These languages were the most requested in schools. For students who immigrated after the age of 10, they can actually apply and receive an exemption from learning the Irish language. Now, as we look at the policy, we look at SWAMI, where as language policy evolves into a mechanism to excel the acquisition of the Irish language, teachers become servants to the system. Teachers are viewed as bureaucrats that follow orders unquestionably. Although now with initiatives like the 20-year strategy, we're finding out that Irish people are taking pride in their language. Cities independently, education independently, and government progressively continue to work towards revitalization of the language, which is bringing the language back from the brink of extinction. Ireland has come a long way, ranking in the top 7 for the most developed nations in the world, according to the Human Development Index from the United Nations. Dublin, the capital city, is also ranked in the top 30 Alpha ranking for the most globalized cities. Property values have increased due to so many properties being sold to visitors to the country whom fell in love with the nation's beauty and opportunities for a global audience. With the majority of the population of Ireland and the government moving in the direction to revitalize the language, maybe now a true bilingual environment can happen in their future.